"You're a monster," my mother screamed, her voice echoing in the hospital hallway. "How could you just let your sister die?" I stopped, took a deep breath, and turned around. The truth is, I didn't let my sister die. My sister died to me years ago. My name is Marilyn, and I'm 38 years old. The air in the hospital room was cold, sterile, smelling of antiseptic and quiet desperation. The only sound was the rhythmic, indifferent beep of the heart monitor connected to the woman in the bed. My sister, Priscilla. Her usually vibrant blonde hair was dull and thin against the white pillowcase, her skin had a pale, waxy sheen, and the designer clothes were replaced by a standard-issue hospital gown. My mother stood gripping my father's arm, their eyes fixed on me, pleading. They weren't looking at their daughter, they were looking at a cure. A walking, talking bag of bone marrow. They said she needed a miracle. They said I, the only match, was that miracle. But as I looked at the face of the person who had systematically, gleefully, destroyed my life's work, the woman who had framed me, lied about me, and celebrated my downfall, I didn't feel pity. I felt nothing. I didn't see a sister. I saw a stranger. And to a stranger who had tried to bury me, my answer was simply, number. Before you judge me, you need to understand that this decision wasn't made in this cold, sterile room. It was forged in the fire of 1,000 betrayals, a lifetime of being made to feel invisible. This wasn't just about a medical procedure, it was the final chapter in one of those devastating family revenge stories you only think happen in movies. If you've ever felt like the forgotten one in your own family, the one whose accomplishments were always silenced, just type the city you're watching from in the comments. Let's see how far this silent strength reaches. So, what is the price of forgiveness? Is there a line of betrayal so deep that it can never be uncrossed? I've asked myself that question 1,000 times, staring at my ceiling in the dead of night. Society tells us that family is everything, that blood is thicker than water, and that forgiveness is a virtue. But what happens when the person asking for your blood is the same one who spilled yours without a second thought? What do you owe the architect of your own ruin? It's a heavy, impossible question, and I know my answer makes some of you uncomfortable. It made me uncomfortable for a long time. To understand how I could stand there and deny my sister life, you can't start at the end. You have to go back. Back to a sun-drenched, manicured lawn in Charleston, South Carolina. Back to a beautiful, historic house on the Battery where every portrait was perfectly hung and every secret was perfectly kept. Back to a place where I learned early on that there are two roles a child can play in a family like mine, the star and the shadow. My role was chosen for me before I could even speak. It was a silent contract I was forced to sign, and it would take me nearly 4 decades to finally break it. Let me know. Were you ever the scapegoat in your family? Type fixer if you were always the one expected to sacrifice, or star if you were the golden child. I really want to see the balance in the comments below. My family lived in a perfectly restored, pre-war home on Charleston's prestigious Battery, overlooking the harbor. Its pastel pink stucco walls, deep green shutters, and wrought iron gate hid a reality far less colorful. My father, a respected attorney, was the 3rd generation in his firm, a man who wore his family name like a tailored suit. My mother was the chairwoman of every notable charity committee in the city, her smile as polished as our antique silverware. From the outside, we were the epitome of Southern grace and tradition. We didn't just look the part, we traded on it. It was our currency. Priscilla, with her straight blonde hair and cornflower blue eyes, was the perfect product of that brand. She was charming, sociable, and every inch the Southern belle my mother had always wanted. And then there was me, Marilyn, with unruly auburn curls and green eyes that seemed to belong nowhere in our family portrait. While Priscilla learned cotillion dances and piano, I escaped into science textbooks and nature documentaries. She was the masterpiece displayed in the living room. I was the strange, old curio stored in the attic. The difference wasn't just cosmetic, it was foundational. She was cultivated, I was tolerated. To their friends, my parents would say, "Oh, Marilyn is our bookish one. She has a mind of her own." It sounded like a compliment, but it wasn't. It was an apology. It was their way of saying, she isn't like us, and we don't quite know what to do about it. The subtle, daily cuts of favoritism were one thing, but the first truly public display of my status in the family happened when Priscilla turned 18. In Charleston, for families like ours, a daughter's 18th birthday is marked by one thing: her debutante ball. It's a rite of passage, an archaic but powerful tradition where a young woman is formally presented to society. It's less about the girl and more about the family's standing. Priscilla's was the event of the season. She wore a custom-made silk gown that cost more than a car, with elbow-length white gloves and our grandmother's pearls. The Charleston Cotillion was held at a historic downtown hotel, complete with a 10-piece orchestra. I remember watching her waltz with my father, her face glowing, featured prominently in the society pages of the Post and Courier the next day. It was the ultimate validation, a public anointment. 3 years later, my 18th birthday approached. The silence from my parents was deafening. When I finally got the courage to ask my mother about it, she just patted my hand with a dismissive little smile. "Oh, Marilyn, honey," she said in that soft, syrupy southern drawl. "You know you're not the type. You hate all that fuss. We'd just be putting you through an ordeal you'd despise." They framed their neglect as a kindness, a consideration for my introverted nature. But I knew the truth. It was a public declaration. Priscilla was worth presenting to the world. I was not. I was an inconvenient secret to be kept within our pastel pink walls, a footnote in their perfect family narrative. If this story is hitting you hard, don't forget to hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that these stories of quiet humiliation matter, and it tells me that I'm not alone in this fight. The humiliation of the debutante ball was a social wound, but the next betrayal was far more tangible. It was a theft. My grandmother Edith, a woman who saw the imbalance in the household even if she felt powerless to stop it, had tried to level the playing field from beyond the grave. In her will, she had established a trust fund for both me and Priscilla. On our 25th birthdays, we were each to receive a check for $250,000. It was a fortune, a ticket to true independence. Priscilla got hers right on schedule. Within 2 years, it was gone: a failed high-fashion boutique on King Street, a few lavish trips to Europe, and a brand-new Mercedes convertible. My parents just sighed and called it a learning experience. My 25th birthday arrived with a knot of anticipation in my stomach. This wasn't about parental affection, this was a legal document. It was my birthright. When I brought it up with my father in his mahogany-paneled study, he didn't even look up from his papers. "Ah, yes, the trust," he said calmly. "There was an unfortunate downturn. I invested your share in a promising real estate venture down by the coast. It didn't pan out. That's the way the market goes sometimes, Marilyn." It was so clean, so dismissive. For years, I believed him. It wasn't until I was home for a Christmas years later, helping clean out his old office, that I found the old bank statements. The investment wasn't in real estate. There were 3 wire transfers, totaling exactly $250,000, made to 3 different credit card companies and a casino in Vegas. All of them were in Priscilla's name. They hadn't invested my future, they had liquidated it to erase her past. That discovery, finding those bank statements, didn't break me, it freed me. The fantasy that I could ever earn their love or respect died in that dusty office. They hadn't just stolen my money, they had stolen my hope, and in doing so, they had severed the last chain holding me there. My escape route wasn't financial, it was intellectual. I poured every ounce of my energy, anger, and grief into my studies. My high school grades became my weapon, my SAT scores my ammunition. While Priscilla was planning parties, I was planning a getaway, one textbook at a time. The day I received my acceptance letter to the genetics program at Duke University with a full academic scholarship was the day I was reborn. I remember telling my parents. My father glanced up from his newspaper and grunted, "Good school." A bit far. My mother's only comment was to wonder aloud if the North Carolina weather would be bad for my hair. 5 minutes later, Priscilla called to announce she'd gotten a new puppy, and my academic achievement was forgotten. Before I left, I went to say goodbye to my grandmother Edith. She was frail, sitting in her armchair overlooking the garden. She took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong, and looked right into my eyes. "You're different from the rest of them, child," she whispered, her voice thin as paper. "Don't you ever forget it. Now go on and find your real people." Sometimes a tree's roots run deeper and in different soil than where it was first planted. At the time, I thought she was being poetic. I had no idea she was giving me the literal key to my entire life. I drove out of Charleston that August, without looking back, the humid southern air feeling less like home and more like a fever I had finally broken. Research Triangle Park, North Carolina, was the antithesis of Charleston. It was a world built on intellect and innovation, not inheritance and etiquette. No one cared about your family name or whether you'd had a debutante ball. They cared about your data, your methodology, your mind. For the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe. I completed my PhD in molecular genetics in record time and was immediately offered a postdoctoral fellowship, which soon turned into a lead researcher position at a cutting-edge biotech institute. My life became the lab. It was my sanctuary. In science, there are no favorites. Data is impartial. A theory is either proven or it is not. It was the purest form of meritocracy I had ever known. I found a new family there, a chosen one. There was my mentor, Dr. Agnes Foster, a formidable, brilliant woman in her 60s who saw a spark in me and nurtured it with the fierce protection I'd never gotten from my own mother. And then there was Walter Chen Walt, my colleague in the lab next door. A geneticist with a dry wit and a quiet understanding of the walls I had built around myself. He didn't try to tear them down, he just pulled up a chair and sat with me on the outside. For a decade, my world was a controlled, logical, and rewarding place. I was no longer Marilyn, the strange, bookish daughter. I was Dr. Marilyn Kent, a respected scientist on the verge of a major breakthrough. Have you ever found your true family in a place you least expected? If you've ever built a life for yourself far from where you started, share what city you made your new home in. It's a testament to the fact that we can choose where we bloom. My work focused on something deeply personal to me, using targeted gene editing to treat a rare and aggressive form of pediatric leukemia. For years, I had seen so many promising therapies fail because they were too much of a blunt instrument, destroying healthy cells along with the cancerous ones. My team and I were developing a smart bomb, a way to reprogram a patient's own immune cells to hunt and destroy only the leukemia cells, leaving the rest of the body untouched. After 3 years of grueling work, countless setbacks, and nights spent sleeping on a cot in my office, we had a breakthrough. The data from our latest preclinical trial was flawless. It worked. It actually worked. The feeling in the lab that morning was electric, a dizzying mix of exhaustion and pure elation. We were on the cusp of something that could actually save children's lives. A week later, I was called into the office of the Institute's director. My heart was pounding. A summons like this could mean anything. He sat me down, a thick folder on his desk between us, and smiled. "Marilyn," he began, "the board has reviewed your team's latest findings. What you've accomplished is revolutionary." He pushed the folder towards me. "We're not just funding your next trial phase. We're establishing a new division dedicated entirely to this technology. We're giving it a $5 million annual grant." I was speechless, trying to process the number. But then he delivered the final sentence. "And we want you to run it. It will be called the Kent Institute for Pediatric Genetic Therapies." My name. They were putting my name on the building. After a lifetime of being erased, I was finally being etched into stone. It was the highest I had ever flown. The view from the top was incredible. But I didn't see the serpent climbing the walls to join me. 2 weeks after the announcement, Priscilla showed up at my lab unannounced. She looked like a mirage from another world, dressed in a designer pantsuit, her blonde hair perfect, smelling of expensive perfume that cut through the sterile lab air. She came with a polished story of woe, a messy divorce, a failed career as a lifestyle blogger, and an even more polished apology. I was a terrible sister, she confessed over an expensive lunch she insisted on paying for. But we're adults now. I want to know you, the real you. A part of me, the lonely child who still lived inside, was dangerously tempted to believe her. Against my better judgment, I let her in. She started visiting the lab, asking seemingly innocent questions about my work. I thought she was finally trying to understand my life. In reality, she was studying my fortress before laying siege to it. The attack was more brilliant and cruel than I could have ever imagined. One evening, using the guest pass I'd foolishly gotten her, she stayed late. She didn't just steal my current research to sell to a rival. She hacked into my server and altered the raw data from 2 of my published papers from years ago, subtly changing values, deleting outliers. Then, she sent an anonymous email to the university's Academic Integrity Board, flagging my work for fraud. She didn't just want to steal my future, she wanted to erase my past, to make it all a lie. Have you ever given someone a second chance only to have them burn you worse than the first time? If you know the unique sting of that kind of betrayal, just write, "Never again" in the comments. It's a promise we make to ourselves. The fallout was immediate and brutal. The anonymous email triggered a full-blown academic integrity investigation. All my research was frozen, my lab access restricted. The $5 million grant was rescinded pending the outcome. The Kent Institute became a ghost before it was even born. I was put on administrative leave, a pariah in the world I had built. Whispers followed me down the hallways. My name, the name that was supposed to be etched in stone, was now stained with suspicion. I didn't have proof, but I knew. I found Priscilla at an upscale bistro in downtown Raleigh, sipping a mimosa under a sunny yellow umbrella, looking completely unbothered. When I confronted her, she feigned shock, her hand flying to her chest in a theatrical display of concern. Academic fraud? Oh, Marilyn, that's dreadful. Who would do such a thing? But when I detailed how the tampered data was in files only I had accessed recently and during the exact weeks she had been visiting, the mask didn't just slip, she ripped it off. Her soft, concerned expression hardened into a glare of cold triumph. "You're brilliant, I'll give you that," she said, setting her glass down with a soft click. "But you were never very perceptive. Did you really think I came here to play happy family?" Her voice dripped with a lifetime of resentment. "They gave me the debutante balls and the designer dresses, Marilyn. But they gave you their respect. I was the pretty decoration. You were the legacy. They were naming a building after you. A building. I couldn't let that happen. Now, your name is Mud. So, tell me, who's the golden child now?" Her confession left me hollowed out. I retreated into the darkness of my small apartment, the blinds drawn, the silence broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. For weeks, I didn't work. I barely ate. I ignored the endless calls from the university, my lawyers, and even Walt. My professional life was a smoldering ruin, and my personal life was a void. I had run so far from the girl who was invisible in Charleston, only to become a pariah in North Carolina. There was nowhere left to go. The shame was a physical weight, pressing me into the mattress, telling me it was easier to just disappear. Then one Saturday morning, there was a loud, insistent knocking that wouldn't stop. It was Walt, holding 2 large coffees and a look of grim determination. He took in the messy apartment, and my disheveled state without a word, pushed a cup into my hands, and sat down. "It's hopeless, Walt," I mumbled. "It's my word against hers. The golden child versus the black sheep. I know how this story ends." He shook his head. "You're looking at the wrong problem," he said, his voice firm. "Priscilla is just a messy variable in a flawed equation you've been trying to solve your whole life. She attacked your integrity as a scientist. So, be a scientist. The best one I know. Investigate the data points that never made sense, the favoritism, the stolen money, your grandmother's cryptic words. Stop trying to win a family argument and start solving the mystery of your own life." For the first time in a month, a flicker of something other than despair sparked within me. He had given me a protocol. We all have that one friend who shows up when the world shuts us out. If you have a Walt in your life, someone who pulled you from the dark, take a second to just type their first name or initial in the comments. Let's celebrate the chosen family that saves us. Walt's words had given me a new hypothesis to test, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a surge of adrenaline that had nothing to do with fear. I was no longer a victim in a family drama. I was the lead investigator on the most important case of my life. My first stop was Charleston. I drove the 5 hours south, not with the dread of a returning child, but with the focus of a scientist entering the field. My grandmother Edith was in a quiet nursing home now, her mind a flickering map of memories eroded by Alzheimer's. I sat with her, holding her hand, and asked her about the day I was born. Most of what she said was a tangled loop of the past, but then, for a brief, lucid moment, her eyes cleared. There was so much sadness after the boy, Michael, was lost, she whispered. Then you came. A gift. Not from the hospital, though. From the White House on the Hill, Street. Jude's place. The name hung in the air, Street Jude. Patron saint of lost causes. That night, knowing my parents were at their weekly gala, I let myself into the silent, perfect house on the Battery. I went straight to my father's study, to the large floor safe hidden behind a painting of a Civil War general. The combination was, ridiculously, Priscilla's birthday. Of course it was. Tucked behind stacks of property deeds and stock certificates, I found it, a thick sealed manila envelope. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, there was no birth certificate. There were adoption papers. Finalized in the fall of 1987, when I was 6 months old. The originating agency was listed at the top in faded ink, the Street Jude's Home for Infants. It wasn't a theory anymore, it was proven. I wasn't their daughter, I was their secret. Holding those papers, I felt a strange and chilling calm. It was the feeling a scientist gets when the final piece of data confirms a massive, world-altering theory. Everything suddenly made sense in the harshest, clearest light. The missing baby photos, my different looks, the debutante ball I was never meant to have, the trust fund that wasn't truly mine to inherit. I wasn't the broken part of the family machine. I was a piece from an entirely different machine, forced into a role I was never designed to play. But I needed to hear it from someone who was there, someone who had helped build the lie. The lawyer's name on the document was Arthur Callahan. A quick search showed he was retired, living in a Gulf community about an hour's drive from the city. I showed up on his doorstep the next morning. He was an old man with kind, tired eyes that widened in recognition and then filled with a deep, ancient guilt. I didn't raise my voice. I simply held out a copy of the adoption papers. I believe this was your case, I said. He deflated, the fight going out of him after 40 years, and waved me inside. He confessed everything. My parents, devastated after losing their infant son, Michael, to SIDS, were told my mother couldn't risk another pregnancy. Desperate to maintain the facade of the perfect two-child family, they arranged a swift, private adoption. It was about appearances, Marilyn, he said, his voice raspy with regret. Always was with your father. He couldn't bear the thought of people in Charleston knowing. He saw it as a weakness. So they made a pact to raise you as their own and never speak of it again. It was a lie built on pride and grief, and you were the one who paid the price for it. Have you ever had to dig through your own family's history to find the truth? If you've ever felt a secret lurking just beneath the surface of your family's story, let me know in the comments. You are not alone in your search. The lawyer's confession gave me the narrative, the why behind the lie. The adoption papers gave me the legal proof. But the scientist in me needed one final, unimpeachable piece of evidence. I needed the raw data of my own biology. I went online and ordered a DNA kit from one of those popular ancestry services. A few days later, a small box arrived. The process was so anticlimactic for such a life-altering question. I just spit into a plastic tube, sealed it in an envelope, and dropped it in a mailbox. Then, I waited. But the waiting period wasn't agonizing. A strange sense of calm had settled over me. I already had the emotional truth. This was just for validation. It felt less like waiting for a verdict on my life, and more like waiting for lab results on a well-controlled experiment. 6 weeks later, an email popped into my inbox. Your DNA results are ready. I sat at my kitchen table, the morning sun streaming in, and clicked the link. The page loaded with charts and maps of my genetic heritage, mostly Western European, with a surprising bit of Irish. But then I scrolled down to the section labeled DNA relatives. My heart hammered against my ribs. There were names of third and fourth cousins from places like Pennsylvania and Illinois strangers. There was a bold, clinical sentence at the top of the page that summarized everything. We did not find any DNA evidence to suggest you are biologically related to the family members you have listed. 0% match. It was cold, hard, scientific fact. And in that moment, I didn't feel loss. I felt liberated. A weight I had carried my entire life, the weight of not being right, of not being enough, simply dissolved. It was never my fault. I wasn't a flawed version of them. I was a perfectly fine version of someone else entirely, and their opinion of me was suddenly, beautifully, irrelevant. I hadn't yet decided what to do with this liberating truth when my phone rang. It was my mother, her voice a frantic, sharp thing I hadn't heard in years. It was Priscilla. Acute myeloid leukemia. Aggressive. The words struck me with a sense of cosmic, staggering irony. The very type of disease my research aimed to cure had found the sister who had tried to destroy that research. She'd been transferred to the Duke University Hospital, less than 30 minutes from my apartment. They needed me to get tested as a potential bone marrow donor. Of course, I was a match. The universe, it seems, has a very dark sense of humor. And so, we come full circle. Back to that cold, sterile room where our story began. My parents stood there, their hope turning into expectation. They saw this not as a choice, but as my destiny, my final chance to prove my worth to them, to save their real daughter. Priscilla, pale and weak, whispered my name, tears in her eyes, a lifetime of manipulation condensed into one final, desperate performance. I let the silence stretch, feeling their collective will pressing down on me. I looked at the man and woman who had bought me, lied to me, and stolen from me. I looked at the woman who had tried to ruin me. And I thought about the DNA report that proved I owed them nothing. My decision wasn't about revenge, it was about truth. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, steady, and devoid of the emotion they had taught me to suppress for so long. Number. The word landed like a stone in the quiet room. My mother's grief turned instantly to rage. "You monster," she shrieked. My father, his face purple, yelled, "After everything we've given you." I didn't say another word. I just turned and walked out, leaving them behind with their perfect, dying daughter. The sound of her screaming faded behind me as I walked down the long, white hallway, each step lighter than the last. Walking out of that hospital was not an act of hate, but an act of profound self-love. It was the moment I finally chose myself over the role they had assigned me. I never saw them again. I used my research skills to find a digital trail Priscilla had carelessly left, which, combined with the lawyer's testimony, was enough to clear my name at the university. The Kent Institute is moving forward, this time entirely on my own terms. I heard through a distant relative that Priscilla passed away 3 months after our last meeting. There was no triumph in the news, only a quiet, heavy sadness. Her true punishment wasn't my refusal, it was the empty, bitter life her jealousy had created for her. Justice, I've learned, is rarely a clap of thunder. More often, it's the quiet decision to stop letting someone else's storm drown you. My life now is peaceful. It's filled with my real family, Walt, Agnes, and the brilliant team at my institute. I've learned that family isn't an obligation defined by blood you never chose. It's a sanctuary built with people who choose you back. And what about forgiveness? I forgive the people who raised me, not because they deserve it, but because I deserve to be free from the weight of their mistakes. Forgiveness, for me, isn't about reconciliation. It's about release. It's about acknowledging the truth of the hurt and then letting it go, so it no longer has power over your future. My story isn't just one of those family revenge stories, it's a story about reclaiming your own narrative. It's about understanding that sometimes, the only way to win is to refuse to play their game ever again. The world may never know the battles you've fought in silence, but we do. If these stories speak to your truth, subscribe to this channel and join a community that understands that your worth is non-negotiable.